2020 has officially finally begun with the release of Tenet, at least on international markets outside of US. Movie fans, including myself, have been waiting for this film for a long time, and we were unsure what its ultimate fate would be. Between lots of studios moving to digital releases or postponing their movies, and Christopher Nolan, who insisted not only on releasing the film in cinemas, pandemic be damned, so that it can be viewed as he intended, but he also wanted to keep the summer slot in the release schedule. For any other director, this would probably have been an impossible battle, but this is not just any other director. The celebrated filmmaker behind Memento, Prestige, Dark Knight Trilogy, Inception, Interstellar, and Dunkirk is probably the only person in the world right now that can go to a movie studio and secure a $200 million budget for an original property. A movie not based on comic books or on novels or on previously existing properties sequel. That makes Tenet's budget the largest ever for an original property. But boy, can you see where that money went. On the one hand, the spectacle, which we'll get to. On the other, shooting on multiple locations around the world. Finally, fantastic collaborators. The cast is stellar. John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Kenneth Branagh. Cinematographer Hoyte van Hoytema, who previously worked with Nolan on Interstellar and Dunkirk. Music, Ludwig Göransson, who won the Oscar for Black Panther and more recently wrote the absolutely terrific soundtrack for The Mandalorian. So, no matter which way you look at Tenet, it had the makings of a fantastic blockbuster. Nolan himself has stated that this would be his most ambitious film ever. Think about that for a second. So, how good is it? Did it live up to the expectations? Short answer, yes it did. It is very good. But the answer to another question, is it Nolan's best? Is, in my opinion, no. I'll try to explain why without, any spoilers whatsoever, because I think that all of the people involved did a splendid job keeping the details of the plot secret, and I wouldn't want to ruin the fun for anyone. In many ways, Tenet is very similar to Inception. It's a blend between a spy film, an action blockbuster, and a high-concept sci-fi mechanic that lies at the very heart of the film. I will use 3 non-spoiler quotes from the film itself here. "Don't try to understand it, feel it," said to John David Washington's protagonist when he first learns the rules of the mechanic. "Does your head hurt yet?" a question he is asked at a later point in regards to those very same mechanics, which is also surely a question asked to the audience. And finally, the protagonist's response to these explanations. Whoa. Like Inception, Tenet tries to balance out 2 fundamental things. One is a gripping and engaging story, a plot that is high concept yet explained enough that it's easy to follow for a general audience. A plot that is smart but just accessible enough to make you proud that you can grasp it. The second thing is the spectacle itself, the grand scale of the story that's being told, the mind-bending sequences, the car chases, the explosions, the shootouts, the set pieces that make you go, this is incredible, this is stunning, this is why movies should be seen in theaters on the biggest screens possible. But unlike Inception, that balance, I think, is imperfect. I think that that film was almost flawless in terms of achieving that balance between the 2 things. Tenet isn't. It veers a bit too much towards the spectacle side, sacrificing some of the story aspects. By going for absolutely jaw-dropping sequences, it occasionally forgets to explain itself clearly, to make itself a great story regardless of the set pieces. It's simply not as tight, not as refined, instead trying to constantly awe you with the fireworks. To some extent, I have to admit it works. The film has an almost relentless pace, quickly moving from one action sequence to the next, allowing little room to breathe, yet most of the time allowing the audience to keep up if they focus. And because of the pacing and the way it's structured, it kind of surprised me several times. Because the movie goes on, and then at one point you get the setup to a sequence that feels like a very clear final act of the film. So I'm thinking, this is it. This is going to be the big one, the final massive set piece. But then, and it happens, and it is big, and it is impressive, and then it ends, and it transitions straight into the next one, along with a plot twist. And I was like, wow, okay, so this is going to be the final act, as it turns out. And then that ends, and it's still not the end of the movie, because there's another set piece that's probably bigger than the previous two combined. So you're constantly just bombarded by action. And the quality of that action, it is goddamn brilliant. So many of the scenes made me go, how in the world did they shoot this? This is some sort of black magic, surely. And then I learned afterwards that the film used exactly 0 green screens. What we see is what was actually done. Put it like this, I'm quite interested in the behind the scenes stuff, and normally I'm able to figure out on the fly how a scene was shot, what tricks were used to fool the audience. This one, I give up. I don't know how they've done all the stuff that they've done. There is one sequence, it was shown on the trailer, so I'll just talk about what you already could have seen, where a plane rolls through an airport and crashed into a building. I've read that while trying to figure out how to do this scene with, with models and stuff, Nolan discovered that there are actually a lot of derelict planes being sold available on the market, and it ended up being cheaper and simpler to just buy a real 747 and crash it into a building. And that's not, by the way, that's not the final sequence of the film, nor is it the most impressive one, I assure you. So we know the spectacle is impressive, it's incredible. Now on to the story. I'll be fair and say that it is really well thought out, and the plot is constructed pretty immaculately. Like The Prestige, there are lots of clues dropped by the director throughout the film that you can see some things here, some things maybe wrong, some things weird, and then they only start making perfect sense as you learn the details of the story, as you learn new information. It is like an intricate puzzle that you have to solve. I'm sure it's worth seeing the movie twice for that reason. But it is also incredibly convoluted. A lot of the things don't make any sense until the end when you know everything. And even then, when you think about things in detail, there are some that made me go, really? Does that make sense? Was that the most sensible thing that you could have done here? Going back to the Inception comparison, I also remember that film left me speechless. I watched it with my dad in a movie theater, and on the way home I was just completely silent in the car. I didn't know what to talk about, and then I couldn't think of anything else for the next couple of days, other than that story and its implications. Tenet definitely does not carry so much food for thought in the philosophical department. The story is pretty cool, and the sci-fi mechanics are incredible. And they did leave an impression, to be sure. I'm still excited 24 hours after leaving the movie theater. But it's more me marveling at the cinematic achievement of it all that the film is, rather than the implications of the plot itself. I mentioned that the plot also has some flaws. I'd say that comes down mainly to the villain of the film. As threatening and entertaining as Kenneth Branagh is in the role, because he is those things, there are some leaps in logic in regards to his character and his motivations, which left a bit to be desired for me. But there are also flaws of the spectacle. I mentioned the multiple final acts thing, and while it certainly is amazing to have the movie constantly raise the stakes and improve from one sequence to the next and get more jaw-dropping by the minute, the actual final act, to me, was a bit too much. Because of how overblown it is, because of how much stuff is happening all the time, I think it gets almost impossible to follow, especially in one key scene towards the end. There's an explanation at the very end of it, but as I was watching it, I thought to myself, this is still unbelievably impressive what's going on the technical level especially. But I am checking out a little bit. I can't keep track of what exactly is going on, who's where, and that makes me care less. On the plus side, performances are very good from pretty much everyone involved. I especially liked Kenneth Branagh and Elizabeth Dembicki, who, like in her role in Widows 2 years ago, is once again shining very brightly. I think Washington is great as protagonist. My girlfriend really enjoyed Pattinson. I think he's less impressive than the rest, but still very solid nonetheless. Goranson's score helps keep the tension up all the time, and it's definitely a change of pace from Hans Zimmer's scores. If you don't know, he refused to work with Nolan again after several collaborations in a row, but that's only because he was busy doing Dune, which looks to be a terrific film in its own right. While we're on the topic of sound, Tenet unfortunately suffers from the same maladies that plague most of Nolan's films, which is pretty bad sound mixing. The music and sound effects are incredibly loud and the dialogue is way too silent. I'm convinced that without subtitles it's not possible to make out every single time what the characters are saying. And yeah, Nolan always maintains that he mixes specifically for IMAX and therefore the sound is not that great in other formats. But I did see the film in IMAX, and that excuse just doesn't fly. The sound is still off balance. So to bring this all to some sort of conclusion, the things I've said may sound weird because I think I'm still visibly excited by the film, and yet I had a fair share of criticism towards it. Because I genuinely think that it is flawed, and those flaws have to be recognized. I do think that because of them, Tenet won't be a classic film to return to as much as some of Nolan's other work, some of his previous films. But I would also be lying if I said I didn't have tons of fun watching it. It was an unbelievable cinematic experience and still a very good film overall. And perhaps one of the most jaw-dropping examples of huge cinematic spectacles that I've ever seen, to the point that I will say this. Even if you're not as excited about this film or film in general as I am, and plan to only check this movie out once to see what the buzz is about, do not wait for it to be released on Blu-ray or online. If there's only one time that you want to see it, go do it on the biggest screen possible. Do yourself a favor. And as a bit of an inversion of that, if there's any film you should see in a movie theater, especially any one film you should see in a movie theater, especially this year, this is the one.